The Cursed Life of Hans. A medieval executioner, Hans was born in the freezing winter of Bavaria in the late 15th century. On the day he came into the world, the snow fell so heavily that the road out of the village was completely blocked. In a small wooden house on the edge of town, the cry of a newborn rose above the howling wind outside. His father, Dieter, was the executioner of the town. Hans's grandfather had been one too. No one in the family had ever done anything else, and no one ever had the chance to. In those times, once a family was branded executioners, every other door was shut to them. A childhood set apart from an early age, Hans felt different. Whenever his mother took him to the market, the vendors would place food on the table and step back, careful not to touch her hand. The other children stayed away. Some would shout, "Murderer's son," before running off. Once, Hans stormed home and asked his father angrily, "Why do they hate me? I didn't do anything." His father stared at him for a long moment before answering quietly, "They hate my work, and they hate anyone who carries my name. One day, you'll understand, Hans." The first lesson when Hans was 7, his father took him to the town square. A wooden scaffold stood in the middle, surrounded by a large crowd. That day, a horse thief was to be executed. Hans stood behind his father, watching as the condemned man knelt, hands bound, his face pale. Dieter laid the freshly sharpened axe on his shoulder, and with a single stroke, it was over. The crowd roared, but Hans felt a chill crawl up his spine. That night, sitting by the fire, Dieter said, "A stroke must be swift, clean, and precise. It is not only skill, but mercy. We do not kill for joy, but to carry life in isolation." The family lived apart from the rest of the town, near the place of execution. They were not allowed inside the church or at village festivals. Marriage was limited. The children of executioners could only marry into other executioner families or people from equally shunned backgrounds. When Hans married Anna, a young woman from a neighboring town, the priest refused to perform the ceremony in church. They were wed in their kitchen, with only a handful of relatives present. No music, no bells, only the sound of rain against the roof. Anna knew she was binding herself to a life despised by society, but she accepted it. Hans's first execution at 22. Hans carried out his first execution alone, a middle-aged man convicted of murder. As he stepped onto the scaffold, Hans heard the roar of the crowd, but his eyes were fixed on the man's neck. One stroke, decisive. Blood sprayed, the crowd shouted, and Hans's hands trembled slightly, though he let no one see. That night, he drank alone until he collapsed. In his dreams, the man still stood there, turning away without a word. Haunting cases. Once, Hans had to execute a young man, barely 18, for stealing bread during a harsh winter famine. The law was merciless. Before the execution, Hans handed him a mouthful of strong liquor and whispered, "I will make it as quick as I can." Another time, he was ordered to burn a woman accused of witchcraft. As the flames rose, her screams echoed across the square. That night, Hans lay awake, hearing the wind outside like the wailing of the dead. The executioner's other work. Few knew that the executioner had other duties: collecting bodies of plague victims, killing injured horses, burying the condemned. Many nights, Hans went out in the rain to carry away the corpse of a beggar who had frozen to death on the roadside. He once told Anna, "They need me when the work is filthy, but they despise me when I return." The few who did not fear him, despite his isolation, Hans had a few friends, men also living on the margins: a butcher, a traveling quack doctor, and a coffin maker. On winter nights, they drank beer together, sharing strange stories. Old age and departure. By the age of 50, Hans had executed hundreds. Every face remained with him. Some went in fear, others in peace. All left their mark. One autumn morning, Hans hung the axe on the wall and handed it to his nephew, the only one willing to continue the trade. Epilogue. The wandering years Hans left on a foggy autumn morning. The axe stayed behind. On his back was only a small cloth bag, a few coins, a dagger, and a worn black cloak. No one saw him off. To the townsfolk, Hans had simply vanished. The first days away, he traveled along leaf-covered roads, sleeping in cheap inns, avoiding towns where he might be recognized. Hans had worked in many places, and even with his face hidden beneath a hood, someone might remember looking up at him from the execution block. Finding work proved difficult. When people learned of his past, they avoided him or turned him out. Finally, Hans stopped at a small border village. He introduced himself as Hans the Carpenter and took up repairing houses, building doors, making tables. The hands that once swung the axe now shaped oak, hammered nails, and fixed hinges. Those unafraid of him in that village. Hans met Greta, an elderly widow who baked bread. She never asked about his past, only knowing he works hard and speaks little. Her grandson Jakob often visited Hans's workshop, curious about his work. One day, Jakob asked, "Mr. Hans, why are your hands so scarred?" Hans smiled faintly. "I once had a hard job, but now I work with wood. Wood doesn't scream." A ghost from the past one winter afternoon. While Hans was sawing planks, a stranger entered. His long coat and scarf covered most of his face. He stared at Hans for a long time before saying, "You're Hans, the executioner from Markbright, aren't you?" Hans froze. The man continued, "You don't recognize me? I'm the brother of the man you beheaded 10 years ago." Silence hung heavy. Hans set down the wood and said quietly, "I acted under orders, but I remember, and I prayed for him." The man said nothing more, then left without looking back. When the door closed, Hans stood alone, listening to the wind through the cracks like the sigh of the past. Silent atonement. From that day, Hans began quietly helping the poor, repairing houses for free, splitting firewood, making chairs for children. He never spoke of his past, but in his heart, this was how he tried to atone for the lives he had taken. Greta once told him, "You always seem sad, Hans, but the children adore you. You may not know it, but to them, you're a good man." The last days? Hans lived more than 10 years in that small village. Every evening, he sat outside his workshop, watching the sun set over the fields, remembering the faces that had passed through his life, both the living and the dead. One winter morning, they found him slumped over his workbench, the old black cloak around his shoulders, his hands resting on a half-finished piece of oak. On the table lay a scrap of paper with shaky writing. "Remember, the executioner is human too." The villagers buried him in the small hillside graveyard. No tombstone, just a wooden post carved with Hans Carpenter. But for those who had known him, the story of the man who laid down the axe in search of peace was passed on for generations.